Picture this: a world where the pages of ancient books weren't just filled with words, but with creatures so astonishing they defied the very laws of nature. Dragons breathing fire, serpents with the power to petrify, and birds that rose from their own ashes. These weren't just flights of fancy to the people of the Middle Ages. They were real. Or at least, they were real enough to shape entire civilizations. Welcome to the mesmerizing realm of medieval bestiaries, where every creature, no matter how bizarre, carried a lesson, a warning, or a glimpse into the divine. These weren't just books, they were windows into a universe where the impossible felt tangible, and the line between beast and myth was deliciously blurred. Think about the last time you heard a story that sent shivers down your spine, maybe a tale of a monster lurking in the shadows or a heroic creature with miraculous powers. Now, imagine living in an era where those stories weren't just entertainment, they were gospel. Medieval bestiaries were more than collections of animal lore. They were moral compasses, scientific texts, and works of art all rolled into one. They taught people how to live, how to fear, and how to marvel at the wonders of creation. And the creatures within them, they weren't just figments of imagination. To the medieval mind, they were as real as the lions prowling the deserts or the whales breaching the oceans. These legends didn't just exist, they dominated thought, inspired explorers, and even influenced the science of their time. So why do these ancient animal legends still captivate us today? Maybe it's because they remind us of a time when the world felt vast and untamed, brimming with mysteries waiting to be uncovered. Or perhaps it's because these creatures, whether noble or nightmarish, speak to something deep within us, a primal fascination with the unknown. Over the next 25 legends, we'll travel through enchanted forests, dive into treacherous seas, and soar across skies ruled by winged beasts. You'll meet the phoenix, whose fiery rebirth symbolized hope, and the basilisk, whose gaze could turn men to stone. You'll discover how a harmless-looking rabbit was once thought to possess deadly secrets, and why elephants were believed to have no knees. This isn't just a journey into the past, it's an exploration of how myths shape our understanding of the world. So ready yourself for a voyage into the extraordinary, where every creature has a story, and every story holds a truth that still echoes centuries later. To grasp the magic of medieval bestiaries, we have to step back to their roots, a time when science and scripture walked hand in hand. The foundation of these extraordinary books traces back to an ancient text called the Physiologus, written in Greek around the 2nd century. This wasn't just a dry list of animals, it was a tapestry of nature and faith, where every creature, from the humble ant to the majestic lion, carried a hidden lesson. Early Christian scholars saw the natural world as a mirror of divine truth, and the Physiologus became their guide, translating the habits of animals into spiritual allegories. Imagine a world where a pelican pecking its own breast to feed its young wasn't just a curious behavior, it was a symbol of Christ's sacrifice. By the time these ideas reached medieval Europe, they had transformed into something even richer. Monks in secluded scriptories pored over crumbling manuscripts, copying and expanding them with vivid illustrations that brought these creatures to life. Gold leaf shimmered on the pages, and intricate borders framed beasts both real and fantastical. But here's the twist: accuracy wasn't the goal. A bestiary wasn't meant to teach you what a whale really looked like. It was there to remind you that the whale, with its deceptive stillness, represented the devil lying in wait for unwary souls. These books were sermons in disguise, where the natural world became a classroom for morality. The golden age of bestiaries bloomed between the 12th and 14th centuries, when monasteries and noble courts alike treasured them as objects of wonder and wisdom. They spread across Europe, translated into Latin and vernacular languages, each version adding local flavors and fresh interpretations. A fox might symbolize cunning in one region and betrayal in another, but the core idea remained: animals were messengers, their stories etched into the collective imagination. And while modern science might dismiss these tales as mere superstition, their endurance tells another story. They shaped art, literature, and even heraldry, leaving paw prints and claw marks across centuries of culture. To understand these books is to unlock a mindset where every creature, no matter how strange, had a purpose and a lesson to teach. Of all the creatures that soared through the pages of medieval bestiaries, none burned as brightly in the imagination as the phoenix. This wasn't just a bird, it was a living parable, a creature whose very existence defied death itself. Picture a being cloaked in flames, its feathers shimmering like molten gold and rubies, destined to live for 500 years before surrendering to a fiery end. But here's the miracle: from those smoldering ashes it would rise again, reborn without a single scar. To medieval thinkers, this wasn't mere mythology, it was nature's most profound sermon. The phoenix became the ultimate symbol of resurrection, its cyclical life mirroring the central promise of Christianity, that life could conquer death. Artists lavished attention on this celestial bird, painting it with halos of flame or perched atop palm trees, a nod to its supposed home in Arabia. Scholars like Isidore of Seville wove its story into their encyclopedias, noting how the phoenix carried spices to build its own funeral pyre, a ritual as solemn as it was spectacular. But the bird's influence stretched far beyond the pages of books. Alchemists saw its rebirth as the key to the philosopher's stone, the secret to transforming base metals into gold. Kings embroidered phoenixes onto their banners, turning the creature into an emblem of undying power. Even early naturalists, though skeptical of its existence, couldn't resist pondering its symbolism. What if the phoenix was nature's way of hinting at truths beyond human understanding? What makes the phoenix so enduring isn't just its spectacle, but its universality. Across cultures, from ancient Egypt to medieval Europe, versions of this flame-born bird appeared, each echoing the same awe at life's resilience. The Bestiaries, though, gave it a distinctly moral weight. They taught that the phoenix's fire wasn't just destruction, it was purification, a necessary trial before renewal. In a world plagued by war, plague, and uncertainty, the idea that something could emerge unscathed from devastation offered more than hope. It offered a blueprint for the soul. Today, we might dismiss the phoenix as fantasy, but its legacy lingers. Every time we speak of rising from adversity or describe an idea as reborn, we're borrowing a page from those medieval scribes who saw the divine in a bird that refused to die. If the phoenix was medieval Europe's symbol of rebirth, the unicorn was its emblem of untouchable purity, a creature so noble it could only be tamed by innocence itself. Unlike the fiery spectacle of the phoenix, the unicorn dazzled with quiet majesty, a snow-white beast, slender as a deer but with the strength of a stallion, crowned by a single spiraled horn that glittered like polished ivory. Bestiaries didn't just describe it, they wove it into a moral drama. According to these texts, hunters could never capture a unicorn through force. Instead, they needed a young maiden whose virtue would lure the creature to lay its head in her lap, surrendering willingly. This wasn't just folklore, it was a vivid allegory for the medieval reverence for chastity, where purity had the power to disarm even the wildest of spirits. But the unicorn's horn, known as an alicorn, held even greater fascination. Medieval scholars swore it could detect and neutralize poison, a belief so entrenched that kings and popes paid fortunes for cups or amulets made from its supposed remains. Apothecaries ground unicorn horn into powders touted as cure-alls, though in reality, most came from narwhal tusks or rhinoceros horns. The irony, this symbol of incorruptibility became one of history's most falsified relics, a testament to how desperately people clung to its promise of protection. Yet the myth endured, woven into the fabric of medicine, politics, and even religion. When Elena of Aquitaine gifted Charlemagne a unicorn horn, it wasn't just a curiosity, it was a political weapon, a tangible claim to divine favor. Artists and nobles couldn't resist the unicorn's duality, gentle yet indomitable, sacred yet elusive. Tapestries like the Hunt of the Unicorn transformed it into a Christ-like figure, pursued yet triumphant, its blood and body echoing Eucharistic symbolism. Heraldry adopted it as a mark of unassailable honor. Scottish kings stamped it on their coins, while the Medici family flaunted it in their emblems as a badge of enlightened rule. Even skeptics like Leonardo da Vinci pondered its existence, noting how desire could make men believe what they've never seen. Centuries later, the unicorn's grip on our imagination hasn't loosened. It's rebranded as a rainbow-maned icon of whimsy, yet its medieval roots remind us of a time when people saw magic in morality. Whether as a medieval antidote to poison or a modern emblem of uniqueness, the unicorn's true power lies in its refusal to be pinned down, always just out of reach, forever symbolizing the ideals we chase but can never fully possess. While the unicorn symbolized purity, the mermaid represented its dark counterpart, the peril of unchecked desire. Medieval bestiaries painted these creatures not as whimsical figures of modern fairy tales, but as deadly sirens whose beauty masked a mortal trap. Half woman, half fish, they perched on rocky shores or floated among waves, combing their long hair with mirrors, a detail that turned vanity into a weapon. Their songs weren't just melodies, they were spells designed to unravel the resolve of sailors, pulling them toward shipwrecks or drowning them in crushing depths. This wasn't mere superstition. To medieval clerics, mermaids were living metaphors for the slippery slope of temptation, where a moment's weakness could lead to eternal ruin. Yet the mermaid story held a curious twist. Some legends granted her a flicker of humanity. In certain bestiaries, she wasn't purely malicious, but a soul trapped between worlds, weeping for the lives she'd taken. This duality mirrored the era's conflicted views on sin. Was the mermaid a demon or a penitent? The answer often depended on who was telling the tale. Coastal communities spun warnings of her treachery, while monastic scribes sometimes framed her as a cautionary lesson about the seduction of earthly pleasures. Even her mirror carried layered meaning. It reflected not just vanity, but the distorting power of desire, turning truth into illusion. The mermaid's influence seeped far beyond parchment. Sailors swore sightings into logbooks, and cartographers etched her likeness onto sea maps, marking uncharted waters with her image as a shorthand for danger. Cathedrals carved her into misericords and capitals, her tail coiled around fruit or flowers, subtle reminders of Eden's lost innocence. Alchemists speculated that her tears could brew potions, while physicians claimed her flesh, if caught, held curative powers. Like the unicorn's horn, the mermaid became a paradox, a symbol of peril that people still hope to harness. What makes her legend so enduring is its raw humanity. The mermaid wasn't just a monster, she was a mirror. In her, medieval society saw its own struggles, the tension between longing and virtue, curiosity and consequence. Today, we've softened her into a playful icon, but her medieval roots remind us how myths encode our deepest fears. Every time a story warns of siren calls or too good to be true promises, It's borrowing from those ancient bestiaries that knew the most dangerous temptations often wear the fairest faces. If the unicorn and mermaid embodied moral extremes, the basilisk was medieval Europe's ultimate nightmare, a creature so lethal, even its shadow could wither crops and shatter stones. Crowned the king of serpents in Bestiaries, this monstrosity wasn't just feared for its venom. It was death incarnate, a living weapon with a gaze that could stop a man's heart mid-beat. Imagine a grotesque fusion of rooster and serpent, its scarlet crest tapering into a reptilian body, hatched not from nature's order but from a perverse anomaly, a cock's egg incubated by a toad. This unholy origin story wasn't just folklore, it was a theological warning. To medieval minds, the basilisk embodied the devil's defiance of creation, a perversion of divine law that mirrored humanity's own capacity for corruption. But what made the basilisk uniquely terrifying was its indiscriminate lethality. Unlike dragons, which could be bargained with or outsmarted, the basilisk killed without motive. Its breath poisoned the air, its glance turned flesh to stone, and its mere presence blighted the land. Farmers whispered of fields rendered barren by its passing, and travelers swapped tales of villages abandoned after a single sighting. Yet the Bestiaries offered a sliver of hope. This king of serpents had two Achilles' heels. A mirror could turn its lethal gaze back upon itself, while the weasel, a creature mythically immune to its venom, could wage deadly battle in the shadows. These weren't just survival tips, they were allegories. The mirror reflected the power of self-reflection to combat evil, while the weasel symbolized humility triumphing over pride. The basilisk's influence slithered far beyond parchment. Alchemists sought its venom for potions, believing it held the secret to transmutation. Architects carved its likeness into cathedral gargoyles, turning the monster into a stone guardian against sin. Even science borrowed from its legend. The word basilisk later christened the basilisk lizard, famed for walking on water, though this creature's only magic was speed. Centuries later, J.K. Rowling resurrected its terror in Harry Potter's Chamber of Secrets, where the monster's petrifying gaze and serpentine lineage paid direct homage to medieval lore. What lingers most about the basilisk isn't just its horror, but its paradox. This creature, born from an impossibility, became a mirror for society's deepest anxieties: the fear of invisible corruption, the fragility of life, and the thin line between order and chaos. In a world without germ theory or environmental science, the basilisk gave form to the unseen forces that could ravage a community overnight. Today, we've traded medieval monsters for modern metaphors: viruses, climate crises, systemic evils, but the essence remains. The basilisk reminds us that the most enduring legends aren't just about fear, they're about the tools we forge to face it. Among the towering legends of medieval bestiaries, few commanded as much awe as the griffin, a creature forged from nature's most formidable royalty. With the muscular body of a lion and the soaring wings of an eagle, this hybrid wasn't just a fantastical beast, it was a living emblem of dominion, straddling the realms of earth and sky. Bestiaries spun tales of griffins patrolling the gold-rich mountains of Scythia, their talons poised to strike any trespasser daring enough to steal their hoard. But these weren't mere guard dogs of treasure. They were divine enforcers, their vigilance echoing the medieval belief that true power demanded both strength and unwavering watchfulness. What made the griffin resonate so deeply was its duality. The lion, king of beasts, symbolized earthly authority and courage, while the eagle, ruler of the skies, represented divine vision and ascension. Together, they became a potent metaphor for Christ's nature, both human and divine, grounded yet transcendent. Artists carved griffins into cathedral pillars, their forms twisting around columns as if holding up the very heavens. Knights emblazoned them on shields, transforming the creature into a heraldic promise that the bearer wielded both physical might and spiritual grace. Even in literature, griffins pulled the chariots of sun gods or stood sentinel at the gates of paradise, their presence a bridge between mortal and immortal realms. But where did such a vivid legend originate? Some scholars point to the vast fossil beds of Central Asia, where Protoceratops skeletons, dinosaur remains with beaked skulls and four-legged frames lay half-buried in the sand. To medieval travelers stumbling upon these relics, the bones might have whispered of creatures that once ruled the earth with lion-like bodies and eagle-like heads. The Griffin's myth, then, becomes a fascinating case of paleontology colliding with imagination, where ancient bones were woven into moral allegories. Yet the Griffin's legacy outlived its medieval heyday. Alchemists adopted it as a symbol of the philosopher's stone, its dual nature mirroring the fusion of opposites needed to create gold. Explorers like Marco Polo returned from the east with confirmed sightings, insisting these beasts still prowled remote peaks. Even today, the griffin lingers in popular culture, from corporate logos to fantasy epics, a testament to humanity's enduring fascination with guardianship and hybrid vigor. More than just a monster, the griffin remains a mirror reflecting our timeless desire to believe that somewhere beyond the edges of the map, creatures still stand watch over the boundaries of the possible. Dragons dominated medieval bestiaries not just as monsters, but as cosmic adversaries, scaled embodiments of the chaos that threatened to unravel divine order. Unlike the noble griffin or enigmatic unicorn, dragons had no redeeming qualities. Their serpentine bodies coiled around sacred texts, their bat-like wings blotted out the sun, and their fiery breath symbolized the scorching temptations of hell itself. To medieval Christians, every hiss from a dragon's maw echoed the serpent in Eden, every clawed footstep a reminder of the devil's prowling presence. But here's the twist: dragons weren't just symbols of evil, they were narrative engines transforming saints into heroes and kings into legends. Take the tale of St. George, perhaps the most famous dragon slayer of all. Bestiaries didn't just recount his battle, they staged it as a spiritual blockbuster. The dragon demanding sacrifices from a terrified town wasn't merely a beast, it was addiction, greed, or heresy given flesh. George's lance, piercing its throat, became divine truth striking down falsehood. This wasn't fantasy, it was theology in technicolor, a story so potent it splashed across stained glass and sermon manuals alike. Yet George wasn't alone. From Saint Margaret bursting unharmed from a dragon's belly to Saint Martha taming one with holy water, these stories shared a message: faith could conquer even the most primordial fears. But dragons also slithered into the secular world. Kings co-opted their imagery, draping themselves in dragon-slaying symbolism to legitimize their rule. When Richard the Lionheart marched under a dragon standard during the Crusades, he wasn't just flaunting power, he was casting himself as a holy warrior. Heraldry teemed with dragon motifs, their sinuous bodies twisting into coats of arms as emblems of strategic ferocity. Even science bent to their myth. Medieval dragon bones, often fossilized mammoth remains, were venerated as relics of vanquished evils, displayed in churches as trophies of faith over chaos. What's fascinating is how fluid dragon lore could be. In some bestiaries, they were land-bound serpents. In others, winged leviathans spitting venom instead of flame. Eastern traditions, filtering through trade routes, introduced dragons that governed rivers or guarded wisdom, complicating Europe's purely adversarial view. This adaptability ensured their survival long after bestiaries faded. Today, dragons soar through Game of Thrones as political metaphors, or charm children as friendly animated characters, proof that even the Middle Ages' ultimate villains could mold their scales and evolve. Their endurance lies in this duality, their mirrors reflecting whatever fears or fantasies a culture needs them to embody. Whether as satanic foes or misunderstood allies, dragons remain humanity's oldest storytelling companions, whispering that some battles against darkness, against ourselves, are never truly over. Among all the strange and wondrous entries in medieval bestiaries, few were as chilling or as oddly human as the Mandrake. This wasn't just a plant, it was a botanical nightmare, a living thing that blurred the line between flora and flesh. According to legend, mandrakes didn't grow in sunlit meadows but in the shadow of gallows, sprouting from the spilled seed of executed criminals. Imagine a root so unnervingly humanoid it seemed to writhe with arms and legs, its twisted form resembling a tiny, screaming man. But the true horror lay in harvesting it. To uproot a mandrake was to risk death, for its shriek could strike down anyone who dared pull it from the earth. Medieval texts advised a macabre workaround: tie a starving dog to the plant, then tempt it with meat just out of reach. As the dog lunged, it would yank the mandrake free and perish in the process, sparing its master. Why such dread over a root? Because the mandrake wasn't just a plant, it was a paradox. Its very existence straddled the sacred and the profane. On one hand, it was a potent fertility charm. Childless women carried mandrake roots shaped like infants, believing they could summon life where nature had denied it. On the other, it was a tool of dark magic. Witches supposedly harvested it under full moons to brew love potions or summon demons, its human-like form making it a perfect vessel for spirits. Even its scientific name, mandragora, whispered of ancient Greek narcotics and biblical curses. Rachel of the Old Testament traded her husband's desire for mandrakes, while Circe allegedly used it to turn men into swine. The mandrake's grip on the medieval mind reveals something profound about how people saw the natural world. Every plant, every animal wasn't just itself, it was a cipher, a thing loaded with hidden meanings. A root that looked like a person must act like a person, screaming when harmed. A plant born from death must carry death's echo. This wasn't ignorance, it was a different way of knowing, where observation and symbolism intertwined. Modern science has demystified the mandrake. It screams, likely the sound of roots snapping under tension. Its human shape, a quirk of genetics, yet its legacy lingers. From Harry Potter's petrifying seedlings to Pan's labyrinth's whispering horrors, the mandrake remains a symbol of nature's uncanny power to unsettle us. It reminds us that for all our rationality, there's still a part of us that wonders, what if the old stories were right? What if the world is stranger than we dare admit? Amid the menagerie of mythical beasts, the Caladrius stood apart, a creature whose very presence could mean salvation or sorrow. Picture a bird so white it seemed carved from sunlight, perched silently at a sict, its unblinking eyes holding the power to foretell life or death. According to medieval bestiaries, this wasn't just an animal, it was a divine diagnostician. If the Caladrius turned its gaze toward the patient, it would draw their illness into itself, then fly toward the sun, burning the sickness away like morning mist. But if it looked away, that refusal was a death sentence, a silent verdict that no cure could overturn. What makes the Caladrius so haunting is how it mirrored the fragile hope of medieval medicine. In an era where plagues swept through cities unchecked and even minor wounds could fester into graves, healing often felt like a lottery. Physicians relied on astrology, humoral theory, and prayer as much as herbs or surgery. The Caladrius became a tangible expression of that uncertainty, a feathered symbol of the thin line between recovery and ruin. Its legend wasn't just folklore, it was a coping mechanism, a way to make sense of why some lived while others perished. Artists lavished attention on this avian oracle, painting it with wings outstretched over feverish patients in illuminated manuscripts. Its image adorned hospital walls, a silent guardian offering solace to the suffering. The bird's connection to Christ's healing miracles deepened its resonance. Just as Jesus touched lepers and gave sight to the blind, the Caladrius absorbed illness, its white plumage symbolizing purity's power to cleanse corruption. Some texts even claimed the bird's flight mimicked Christ's ascension, carrying earthly afflictions heavenward. Yet the Caladrius also revealed medicine's darker truth. Sometimes the only certainty was despair. Its refusal to look at a patient echoed the helplessness felt by healers facing untreatable cases. In a world without antibiotics or germ theory, death often came not from lack of care, but from lack of tools. The Caladrius, then, was both comfort and curse, a reminder that healing required not just skill, but grace. Centuries later, the bird's legacy lingers in unexpected places. The word Caladrius whispers through medical heraldry, and its imagery inspired the pelican, another medieval symbol of self-sacrifice used in modern hospital logos. More profoundly, it reflects an eternal human truth. We still crave signs, whether from machines or miracles, to tell us who will walk out of the hospital and who won't. The Caladrius may have vanished from Bestiaries, but its lesson endures that hope and helplessness have always been two sides of the same fragile wing. The Bonakin was nature's ultimate practical joke, a beast that looked like a bull but fought like a walking disaster. With horns curled so tightly inward they were utterly useless, this creature had to get creative when threatened. And creative it was. Imagine a predator lunging, only to be met with a torrent of burning dung expelled with such force it scorched trees and sent hunters fleeing in disgust. Medieval bestiaries didn't just describe this defense, they illustrated it with gleeful absurdity, artists capturing arcs of flaming waste like some grotesque fireworks display. Here was a creature that turned humiliation into a survival strategy, proving that sometimes the most effective weapons are the ones no one sees coming. But the Bonakin wasn't just a punchline, it was a parable. Those backwards horns, they symbolized the folly of misplaced pride. A bull's strength is supposed to lie in its ability to gore, yet the Bonakin's horns were as effective as a spoon in a sword fight. Its real power came from the unlikeliest of places, a reminder that appearances could deceive and that true resilience often required embracing the unconventional. In a world obsessed with chivalric ideals and dignified combat, the Bonakin was a cheeky subversion, a living lesson that survival sometimes meant abandoning dignity altogether. What makes this creature so fascinating is how it reflects medieval humor's irreverent streak. Bestiaries weren't all doom and dragons, they had room for the bizarre and the bawdy. The Bonakin's tale was likely inspired by travelers' accounts of Asian oxen or misidentified wildlife, exaggerated into something far more memorable. Its legend spread like, well, its own fiery projectiles, popping up in texts from Constantinople to Canterbury. Even its name, possibly derived from the Greek bonassos for wild bull, became a byword for chaotic escapes. The Bonakin's legacy is a testament to how medieval storytellers balanced the sacred with the silly. It's a reminder that behind the moralizing and the monsters, there was a playful humanity, one that understood laughter could be just as powerful as any sermon. Today, we might see its spirit in internet memes or slapstick comedies, proving that some truths, like the futility of pride or the power of the unexpected, are timeless. The Bonakin didn't just defend itself with fire, it lit up the pages of history with a flame no one could ignore. The Yale was nature's answer to a knight's worst nightmare, a creature that fought not with brute force, but with bewildering tactics. Picture an antelope draped in a goat's shaggy coat, its most fearsome weapons being a pair of horns that could swivel independently like dual-wielded swords. Unlike a bull charging head-on or a stag locking antlers, the Yale could pivot one horn forward while keeping the other poised to strike from an unexpected angle. Medieval bestiaries didn't just describe this oddity, they celebrated it as a masterclass in adaptability, a living lesson that victory often went to those who could think on their feet, or in this case, on their hooves. What made the Yale extraordinary wasn't just its anatomy, but the moral weight scribes assigned to it. In a world where rigid hierarchies ruled, this creature became a symbol of flexible virtue. Its horns, never fixed in position, mirrored the ideal medieval mind, unyielding in principle but nimble in execution. A knight might train for years to perfect a single combat stance, but the Yale's very biology taught that survival demanded creativity. This wasn't just animal behavior, it was philosophy in motion. Even the creature's name hinted at its outsider status, possibly derived from the Hebrew Yale for mountain goat, suggesting exotic origins that fascinated European imaginations. The Yale's influence galloped far beyond parchment pages. Tudor heraldry seized on its image, embedding it into coats of arms as a badge of strategic brilliance. When Henry VII's heralds needed a symbol to represent his dynasty's cunning rise to power, they chose the Yale, its twisting horns echoing the twists of fate that crowned him king. Centuries later, Yale University would adopt a similar-looking beast as its mascot, though the connection is more coincidental than historical. But the medieval Yale's true legacy lies in its subversion of expectations. In a bestiary filled with dragons and unicorns, here was a creature neither wholly mythical nor entirely mundane, proving that even the oddest hybrids could carry profound lessons. Its story resonates today in unexpected ways. Modern military strategists study asymmetric warfare, where smaller forces outmaneuver stronger opponents essentially, the Yale's swiveling horns writ large. Video games feature bosses with multi-directional attacks, and robotics engineers design limbs with independent rotation, all chasing the same principle this medieval creature embodied, that survival favors the adaptable. The Yale reminds us that the Middle Ages weren't just about rigid dogma. They were a time when people looked to nature, even its quirkiest creations, for clues on how to navigate an unpredictable world. In the end, this goat-antelope hybrid wasn't just a fighter, it was a thinker, its horns spinning tales of ingenuity every time they turned. The Manticore was the stuff of sleepless nights, a grotesque puzzle of predator parts stitched together by primal fear. Picture a lion's powerful torso, its tawny fur matted with the blood of past kills, crowned not by a beast's muzzle but by the eerily human face of a grinning man. That unsettling visage, often described as having rows of needle-like teeth, sat atop a body built for slaughter, while its most infamous weapon, a scorpion's tail, curved menacingly overhead, dripping venom. But the true horror lay in its appetite. Medieval bestiaries swore the Manticore didn't just kill, it consumed its victims whole, leaving no bones, no clothing, not even a whisper of evidence behind. This wasn't hunting, it was erasure. The creature's name whispered its origins, Manticore, Persian for man-eater. Travelers returning from the east brought tales of this abomination, their descriptions blurring the line between observation and exaggeration. Greek historians like Ctesias, who likely encountered distorted accounts of tigers or man-eating lions, spun these fragments into something far more sinister. By the time the Manticore slunk into European bestiaries, it had become a walking metaphor of physical embodiment of the era's anxieties about distant lands and their supposed savagery. In a world where maps ended with "Here be dragons," the Manticore filled the shadows beyond Christendom's borders, a warning of what lurked in the uncharted. Yet the Manticore's symbolism cut deeper than simple xenophobia. Its human face suggested a terrifying kinship, as if the monster wasn't just an outsider but a twisted reflection of humanity itself. Theologians latched onto this duality, comparing its hybrid form to the devil's ability to disguise himself as an angel of light. Artists amplified the dread, illuminating manuscripts with scenes of the creature mid-feast, its human-like lips stained red, its tail poised to strike. Even its voice, described as a sinister blend of trumpet and serpent's hiss, became an allegory for deception, a siren song luring the unwary to their doom. What's striking is how the Manticore's legend evolved across cultures. In Persia, it was a real, if rare, predator. In Europe, it became a moral lesson. Bestiaries emphasized its inability to be tamed, a stark contrast to the unicorn's purity or the griffin's nobility. This wasn't a creature to admire or aspire to. It was chaos incarnate, a reminder that some evils couldn't be bargained with. Centuries later, the Manticore's legacy persists, though its meaning has shifted. Modern fantasy novels recast it as a tragic hybrid, while psychologists borrow its name to describe the devouring nature of trauma. But its medieval roots still whisper a chilling truth. The most enduring monsters aren't those we imagine, but those we see or fear we might become in the mirror. The Manticore wasn't just a man-eater. It was the dark side of curiosity, proof that sometimes the most terrifying journeys aren't into the unknown, but into the parts of ourselves we're afraid to face. The Asperdach alone wasn't just a creature. It was a trap, nature's cruelest trick disguised as sanctuary. Imagine the relief of exhausted sailors spotting a lush, uncharted island after weeks of open ocean, only to feel the ground shudder beneath their feet as their refuge plunged into the depths, dragging them down into the abyss. Medieval bestiaries described this monstrosity as a beast so vast its mossy back mimicked land, complete with swaying trees and even sandy shores. Some versions claimed it emitted a sweet fragrance to lure prey, while others swore its flippers churned the water like tidal waves once it awoke. But the true horror lay in its symbolism. This wasn't just a sea turtle gone rogue. It was a living parable about the perils of trusting appearances. What made the Asperdach alone so chilling was its resonance with biblical themes. Like Jonah's whale, it swallowed the unwary whole, but with a twist, this beast didn't spit its victims back out. The parallel wasn't lost on medieval scribes who framed the creature as a warning against greed. Those sailors didn't just drown, they perished because they'd rushed to claim an island without questioning its sudden appearance. The lesson, blind desire for land, wealth, or power, could be just as deadly as any storm. Artists drove the point home with grotesque illustrations, men picnicking on the beast's back, unaware their island had eyes or a gaping maw hidden beneath the waves. Yet the Asperdach alone's origins were likely as mundane as they were magnificent. Ancient mariners might have glimpsed leatherback turtles, creatures that can span 9 feet, or even whales breaching near seaweed-covered rocks, their silhouettes blurred by mist and distance. Over centuries, these sightings tangled with folklore, morphing into something far more sinister. The name itself, a mashup of Greek, aspis, shield, and chelone, turtle, hinted at its deceptive armor-like shell. Pliny the Elder's texts referenced island like sea beasts, while Irish legends spoke of the halfguffer, a fish so vast sailors mistook it for land. The Asperdach alone became a global cautionary tale, its story crossing oceans long before maps could chart them. Its legacy lingers in surprising ways. Modern cryptozoologists speculate about giant turtles in unexplored trenches, while environmentalists use the myth to warn of mistaking plastic debris for safe harbors. Even literature keeps it alive. C.S. Lewis's The Voyage of the Dawn Treader features an eerily similar island where dreams come true that vanishes at dawn. The Asperdach alone's true power wasn't its size but its message. That danger often wears the guise of salvation, and the things we crave most might be the ones that pull us under. In an age of fake news and too good to be true promises, this medieval nightmare feels uncomfortably familiar, a reminder that some illusions haven't changed in 1,000 years. The Lucrota was medieval Europe's answer to a shape-shifting nightmare, a creature stitched together from nature's most unsettling mismatches. Imagine the body of a stag, its legs built for speed, fused with the powerful shoulders of a lion and the flowing mane of a horse. But the true horror lay in its face, a mouth so wide it split the skull from ear to ear, lined not with ordinary teeth but with a solid ridge of bone, like a grotesque zipper sealing its lips shut until the moment it chose to strike. Bestiaries didn't just describe this monstrosity, they gave it a weapon far more terrifying than claws or fangs: the ability to mimic human speech. Travelers wandering lonely roads would hear their own names called out in the voices of loved ones, only to follow the sound straight into the Lucrota's waiting jaws. This wasn't just a predator, it was a living parable about the dangers of deception. In an era where trust was currency and strangers could be spies, heretics, or worse, the Lucrota embodied society's deepest suspicions. Its patchwork anatomy mirrored the medieval fear of hybridity, the idea that mixing categories, whether of species or beliefs, could unravel the natural order. Clerics seized on its legend as a warning against silver-tongued heretics who twisted scripture to lure the faithful astray. Even its name whispered of corruption, derived from the Greek lukos, white, and krotos, clattering, possibly referencing the bone-white clatter of its teeth or the hollow sound of its mimicry. Artists amplified the Lucrota's dread in illuminated manuscripts, depicting its mid-deception mouth stretched obscenely wide as it echoed a child's cry or a merchant's greeting. Some versions gave it glowing eyes or cloven hooves, further cementing its demonic associations. Yet the creature's origins might have been as mundane as they were macabre. Ancient explorers encountering hyenas, animals with bone-crushing jaws and eerie, human-like vocalizations, could have spun their observations into something far more sinister over centuries of retelling. The Lucrota's legend became a cautionary game of telephone, where each generation added another layer of terror. What makes this beast so haunting isn't just its grotesquerie, but its timelessness. Today, we've replaced Lucrotas with phishing scams and deepfake videos, modern mimics that weaponize familiarity to exploit trust. The medieval mind saw a monster, we see a metaphor. But both versions speak to the same unease, that the most dangerous threats aren't the ones that roar, but the ones that whisper in voices we think we know. The Lucrota's tale endures because it reminds us that deception isn't just a tool of monsters, it's a mirror held up to our own vulnerabilities, asking who or what we're willing to believe. The Salamander wasn't just another creature in the medieval bestiary, it was a living contradiction, a sliver of ice dancing in the heart of fire. While real salamanders scurried under damp logs, their mythical counterpart lounged in roaring flames, its slick body chilling the blaze to embers. Bestiaries swore this wasn't mere legend. They described kings draping themselves in cloaks woven from the creature's fur, garments that could withstand even the fiercest infernos. What those monarchs didn't know, their salamander wool was actually asbestos, a mineral so eerily flame-resistant it seemed supernatural. Here was nature's perfect sleight of hand, a humble amphibian transformed into a fireproof marvel through a mix of misunderstood science and sheer wonder. But the salamander's magic went deeper than fabric. Alchemists saw it as the ultimate emblem of transformation, a creature that didn't just survive fire but thrived in it, much like their quest to turn base metals into gold. Its ability to emerge unscathed from destruction mirrored their belief in purification through trial, a concept that seeped into medieval medicine and philosophy. The salamander became a shorthand for resilience, its image stamped onto apothecary jars and furnace doors as a talisman against ruin. Even its name carried weight derived from the Persian samandar, meaning fire within, a poetic nod to its paradoxical nature. What's fascinating is how this myth took root. Aristotle himself speculated about fire-resistant lizards, and Pliny the Elder wove tales of creatures born in lightning strikes. By the Middle Ages, travelers' accounts of asbestos mining, where fibrous minerals were spun into cloth, merged with these ancient rumors, birthing the fiery salamander of legend. The creature's symbolism grew so potent that Renaissance nobles flaunted salamander badges, while Francois I of France adopted it as his personal emblem, engraving the motto, "I nourish and I extinguish," beneath its image. Yet the salamander's legacy is more than a historical curiosity. It's a testament to how humans wrestle with the natural world, bending observation into narrative. Modern science has demystified its fireproof fur, but the creature endures in pop culture, from fantasy novels to corporate logos, still whispering that oldest of alchemical truths, that destruction and rebirth are two sides of the same coin. The medieval salamander didn't just defy flames, it illuminated the spark between what we see and what we dare to believe. The Crocota lurked in the shadows of medieval nightmares, a beast that blurred the line between scavenger and demon. Picture a creature with the mangy pelt of a hyena, its spine ridged like a dragon's and eyes that glowed like embers in the dark. But its most chilling trait wasn't its appearance, it was its voice. This monster could mimic human speech, calling out in the tones of grieving widows or lost children to lure the unwary into its clutches. Even worse, Bestiaries claimed it prowled graveyards by moonlight, using its dagger-like claws to unearth fresh corpses, feasting on flesh with a gluttony that horrified the pious. Here was a creature that didn't just defy nature, it defiled the sacred, turning mourning into mockery and burials into buffets. What made the Crocota so uniquely terrifying was its symbolism. In an era where proper burial was a passport to the afterlife, the idea of a beast desecrating graves struck at the heart of medieval spirituality. Clerics framed its behavior as the ultimate sacrilege, a physical manifestation of moral decay. Its ability to imitate voices twisted the divine gift of language into a weapon, echoing biblical warnings about false prophets who speak with the tongue of angels. Artists drove the point home with grotesque illustrations. The Crocota crouched over an open coffin, its muzzle dripping with grave dirt, or howling from a pulpit in mock sermon. This wasn't just a predator, it was a perversion of order, a reminder that even death offered no sanctuary from corruption. Yet behind the legend lay a kernel of zoological truth. Travelers' accounts of spotted hyenas, animals with bone-crushing jaws and eerie, human-like vocalizations likely birthed the Crocota myth. Hyenas do dig up remains, their powerful limbs adapted for excavating shallow graves. Their famous laugh might have inspired tales of mocking speech, while their matriarchal societies could have seemed unnervingly inverted to medieval Europeans. But the Crocota took these behaviors and dialed them to supernatural extremes, transforming a scavenger into a specter of societal collapse. The Crocota's legacy slithered into unexpected corners of culture. Shakespeare's gravediggers in Hamlet, chattering as they unearth Yorick's skull, owe a debt to this medieval bogey. Modern horror films still feature creatures that mimic voices or violate burial grounds, from the thing's parasitic imitations to pet cemeteries' resurrected dead. But the Crocotta's true power lies in its timelessness. It speaks to a fear deeper than death itself, the dread that even our most sacred rituals might crumble, that the voices we trust could betray us, and that corruption, like this ghoul of the graveyard, is always waiting to dig up what we've tried so hard to bury. The Catapulpas was medieval Europe's most lethargic killer, a creature whose very existence seemed to warn against the dangers of doing nothing at all. Picture a shaggy, buffalo-like beast with a head so heavy it permanently drooped, its snout brushing the dirt as it shuffled through marshes. But this wasn't just an animal with poor posture, its gaze carried death. According to Bestiaries, meeting the Catapulpas's bloodshot eyes meant instant doom, a fate worse than any blade or fire. What made this monster so chilling wasn't its strength or speed, but the opposite, its paralyzing sloth. The creature became a walking sermon, a reminder that indifference could be just as deadly as malice. The Catapulpas's symbolism cut deep in an era that saw sloth as one of the 7 deadly sins. Monastic scribes framed its drooping head as the physical weight of spiritual laziness, its deadly gaze the consequence of neglecting one's divine purpose. Artists drove the point home with eerie illustrations, the beast's neck bent like a broken hinge, its eyes half-lidded yet glowing with unnatural power. Even its habitat swamps and stagnant pools mirrored the moral rot of stagnation. Unlike dragons or griffins, the Catapulpas didn't need to chase its victims. They perished simply by catching its attention, as if apathy itself were contagious. But where did such a bizarre legend come from? The answer might lie in real-world encounters with sick or malnourished animals. A water buffalo weakened by disease, its head hanging low from exhaustion, could easily have inspired tales of a creature that killed without moving. Ancient travelers unfamiliar with bovine illnesses might have witnessed these animals collapsing and assumed their mere glance caused the tragedy. The Catapulpas's myth spread like wildfire, evolving with each retelling until it became a fixture in bestiaries from Ethiopia to England. Pliny the Elder described a similar beast in his Natural History, claiming its breath was toxic enough to wither plants, further blurring the line between observation and exaggeration. What's fascinating is how the Catapulpas's legacy mutated across cultures. In some versions, its breath was deadly instead of its gaze. In others, it fed on poisonous plants, turning its flesh into a lethal feast. Alchemists speculated that its tears could cure blindness, while physicians warned that its shadow caused paralysis. This fluidity reveals how medieval minds wrestled with the idea of passive danger, a threat that didn't attack but existed, like a dormant plague or a neglected duty. Today, the Catapulpas lingers in fantasy games and novels, often reimagined as a swamp-dwelling horror. But its medieval roots still whisper a warning we've yet to outgrow, that sometimes the most profound dangers aren't the ones that chase us, but the ones we're too weary to notice. In a world where burnout and disengagement plague modern life, the Catapulpas feels eerily relevant, a 1,000-year-old reminder that even inaction can have consequences, and that a downward gaze might cost more than we realize. The antlion was medieval bestiaries' most tragic punchline, a creature born not just from myth, but from a cosmic joke. Imagine the offspring of a lion and an ant, its body a grotesque mismatch of predator and prey, the mighty jaws of a beast fused to the fragile legs of an insect, its size dwarfed by its father's shadow yet towering over its mother's colony. But the cruelest twist wasn't its appearance, it was its fate. Bestiaries claimed this hybrid couldn't consume meat like its lion father, nor survive on plants like its ant mother. Trapped between two worlds, it wasted away, a living lesson in the perils of irreconcilable natures. What makes the antlion so fascinating is how it subverted the era's other hybrid legends. Where griffins symbolized nobility and manticores embodied terror, this creature was pure absurdity, a satirical jab at the very idea that all cross-species unions had to be majestic or monstrous. Some scholars believe its tale originated as clerical satire, poking fun at pagan myths of divine animal couplings. Others argue it was a cautionary metaphor for mixed marriages or cultural clashes, warning that some divides could never be bridged. The antlion's slow starvation became a darkly comic allegory for any impossible compromise, where trying to please both sides left you with nothing at all. Artists reveled in its tragicomedy, illustrating the creature with exaggerated pathos, a lion's mane matted with dust, its ant-like abdomen shriveled from hunger. These images often appeared alongside serious moral beasts like the phoenix or unicorn, their grandeur making the antlion's plight even more ridiculous. Yet beneath the laughter lay a surprisingly sophisticated message. In an age where social roles were rigidly defined, the antlion whispered a dangerous truth, that not every inheritance was a blessing, and some legacies could trap you between identities until they destroyed you. The creature's origins might have been rooted in misunderstood zoology. Real-life antlions, insects whose larvae dig sand pits to trap prey, exist, and their predatory habits could have sparked tales of lion-like ants. But medieval scribes took this kernel of truth and spun it into something far richer. By the Renaissance, the antlion had slunk into heraldry as a symbol of doomed ambition, while alchemists adopted it as a warning against mixing incompatible elements. Today, its legacy endures in surprising places. Psychologists reference the antlion as a metaphor for cultural dysphoria, while fantasy writers reinvent it as a tragic monster. But its medieval roots still sting with relevance, a reminder that some contradictions can't be resolved, only endured. The antlion wasn't just a failed hybrid. It was a mirror held up to every impossible choice, every identity crisis, every time we felt torn between worlds with no way to belong to either. The barnacle goose wasn't just another bird in medieval bestiaries, it was a loophole dressed in feathers, a creature born not from eggs but from the sea itself. Picture a shoreline littered with driftwood, each log studded with barnacle shells that, when split open, revealed tiny birds curled inside like shipwrecked secrets. According to legend, these geese didn't hatch from nests but emerged fully formed from the ocean's debris, their wings still slick with brine. This wasn't poetic whimsy, it was a widely accepted fact that let devout Christians feast on fowl during Lent without breaking the church's meatless fast. If the geese weren't born of flesh, the logic went, they were practically vegetables, a divine cheat code carved into nature's rulebook. What makes this myth so fascinating isn't just its absurdity, but the very human needs it served. Medieval Europeans had no way to track the geese's Arctic migrations, so their sudden autumn arrivals seemed miraculous. The barnacle theory filled that gap with a story as functional as it was fantastical, blending observation. Goose-necked barnacles do cling to wood with sheer imagination. But the real stroke of genius was how it twisted theology into a culinary free pass. Irish clerics, in particular, championed the idea, citing it to justify serving goose at pious tables. Even Pope Innocent III weighed in, temporarily banning the practice until scholars could confirm the bird's origins. The barnacle goose became nature's most delicious theological debate, a creature whose existence hinged on semantics as much as science. Artists had a field day with this paradox. Illuminated manuscripts depicted trees heavy with dangling geese or fishermen, harvesting birds from tide pools like maritime fruit. Some illustrations showed shells cracking open to reveal half-formed chicks, their beaks peeking through the fissures. The imagery was so persuasive that naturalists as late as the 16th century included the barnacle goose in their taxonomies, its legend outlasting even the printing press. Yet beneath the humor lies a profound lesson about how myths evolved to serve society's hungers, both literal and intellectual. The barnacle goose wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a narrative patch sewn over the holes in medieval knowledge, one that let faith and appetite coexist peacefully. Today, we've swapped such legends for satellite tracking and migration maps, but the impulse remains the same: to explain the unexplainable in ways that make life a little easier, or at least a little tastier. The next time you see geese flying south, remember their ancestors didn't just defy gravity. They defied logic, one barnacle at a time. The Ouroboros coiled through medieval thought like a serpent made of pure paradox, a creature that devoured itself yet never perished, a circle with no beginning and no end. While not a traditional bestiary beast, this ancient symbol slithered into the margins of illuminated manuscripts and alchemical treatises, its tail forever locked in its jaws. To the medieval mind, this wasn't just an image, it was a cipher for the cosmos itself. Time didn't march forward in a straight line, it spiraled, seasons repeating like the Ouroboros' endless loop. Harvests rotted and regrew, kings rose and fell, and the serpent's body traced it all in a single, shimmering line. What gave the Ouroboros such power was its duality. It wasn't merely destruction or creation, but both at once. The moment the snake's teeth pierced its own flesh became the same moment it was reborn. Alchemists seized on this as the ultimate metaphor for their craft. Just as the serpent cycled through consumption and regeneration, so too did base metals die in the crucible only to be transmuted into gold. The Ouroboros adorned their flasks and scrolls, a reminder that transformation required surrender, that endings were just disguised beginnings. Even the name whispered this truth, from the Greek aura, tail, and boros, devouring, a self-fulfilling prophecy in a single word. But the serpent's reach extended far beyond laboratories. Christian mystics saw it as a mirror of God's nature, infinite, unchanging, yet constantly renewing. The Venerable Bede wrote of time as a wheel, while Hildegard of Bingen described divine energy as a living circle. These weren't abstract ideas, they were attempts to reconcile faith with the observable world, where moons waxed and waned and crops sprouted from their own decay. The Ouroboros became theology in motion, a way to explain how a universe governed by an eternal God could still pulse with cycles of death and rebirth. Artists amplified the symbol's mystique, weaving it into the borders of psalters or etching it onto cathedral walls. Some versions showed the serpent coiled around the world, its scales mapping continents and oceans. Others depicted it biting not just its tail, but its own body in multiple places, forming intricate knots that symbolized the interconnectedness of all things. These weren't decorations, they were diagrams of a world view where everything, life, knowledge, even sin and redemption, was part of an unbroken chain. Today, the Ouroboros still slithers through our collective imagination, from Jungian psychology's embrace of it as an archetype of wholeness to modern sci-fi's time loop narratives. But its medieval roots remind us of a time when people didn't just observe nature's cycles, they revered them as sacred geometry, written in the flesh of a single, self-sustaining serpent. The Ouroboros wasn't just a symbol of infinity, it was a promise that even in a world of constant change, something essential always remains. The werewolf was medieval Europe's ultimate identity crisis, a man one moment, a ravenous beast the next, his humanity unraveling under the silver glare of the full moon. Bestiaries didn't just catalogue this shapeshifter, they framed him as a walking cautionary tale, Unlike dragons or griffins, the werewolf wasn't some distant monster. It was the neighbor who vanished at night, the woodsman with two sharp teeth, the friend whose eyes gleamed a little too yellow in the firelight. These stories tapped into a primal fear that beneath the thin veneer of civilization, every person was just one full moon away from becoming the thing they feared most. What made the werewolf legend so potent was its duality. Some versions painted these creatures as irredeemable predators, their transformations a metaphor for succumbing to sin. A man who lied might grow a wolf's snout, a murderer's hands could twist into claws, but other tales whispered of tragedy, of knights cursed for blasphemy or peasants wronged by witches, forced to howl at the moon until someone showed them mercy. The Bestiaries, a medieval French lay, even featured a noble werewolf who retained his courtly manners, proving the beast and the man could share one skin. This tension between monstrosity and humanity gave the myth its enduring power, reflecting society's own struggles with violence, guilt, and redemption. The details of transformation varied wildly. Some werewolves donned enchanted pelts, while others drank cursed water or bargained with demons. A few, like the 16th century case of Peter Stump, the werewolf of Bedburg, were accused of using witchcraft to hunt as wolves before returning to human form, their crimes blurring the line between folklore and true crime. These stories weren't just entertainment, they were frameworks for explaining the unexplainable. When famine or plague struck, when children vanished near the woods, the werewolf offered a villain whose face you might recognize. Artists amplified the horror, illuminating manuscripts with scenes of mid-transformation men caught between forms, their fingers elongating into talons, their mouths stretching into muzzles. These images played on medieval anxieties about the body's fragility, how easily order could dissolve into chaos. Even the moon, long associated with madness, became a character in the drama, its cycles mirroring the instability of human nature. Yet the werewolf's legacy outlasted the Middle Ages, evolving with each era's fears. Today, we've recast them as tragic antiheroes or romantic rebels, but the core unease remains. The werewolf isn't just a monster, it's a mirror reflecting our eternal question. How much of our animal selves do we carry inside, and what might unleash them? In a world where beastly behavior still makes headlines, the medieval werewolf's howl echoes louder than ever. The siren's song wasn't just a melody, it was a weapon, a symphony of destruction wrapped in unbearable beauty. Unlike their mermaid cousins who lured men to watery graves with whispered promises, sirens ruled the skies, their feathered wings and haunting voices weaving a tapestry of temptation. Medieval bestiaries transformed these Greek harpies into Christian cautionary tales, their harmonies twisted into hymns of hubris. Picture a rocky shore littered with shattered hulls and bleached bones, the air thick with the scent of salt and regret. High above, perched on jagged cliffs, the sirens waited, their voices harmonizing with the wind until no sailor could resist steering toward ruin. This wasn't just a shipwreck, it was a spiritual shipwreck, a parable about the perils of choosing earthly pleasures over divine salvation. What made the siren so terrifying was her duality. Her song wasn't screeching or grotesque, it was exquisite, a sound so pure it seemed plucked from heaven itself. That was the trap. Bestiaries framed her music as a counterfeit of sacred hymns, a demonic parody of the choirs angels sang. To succumb wasn't just weakness, it was blasphemy, a betrayal of the soul's true purpose. Artists drove the point home with chilling detail. Illuminated manuscripts showed sirens with psalm books clutched in their talons, their mouths open in perfect mimicry of pious chant. Even their hybrid forms carried meaning: birds, creatures of the air, grafted onto women's bodies, symbolizing how temptation could lift you up only to dash you down. Yet the sirens' roots stretched back to ancient Greece, where they haunted Odysseus's voyage. Homer's versions were winged psychopomps, guiding souls to the afterlife, but medieval scribes recast them as agents of moral decay. Their evolution reveals how myths mutate to serve new fears. In a world where the church warned against secular music and earthly delights, the siren became the ultimate seductress, not of flesh but of faith. Sailors who escaped their islands were said to wither away, forever haunted by the memory of that lost, perfect sound. The siren's legacy echoes far beyond Bestiaries. Her song slithers into modern metaphors, from the siren call of addiction to the algorithmically crafted allure of social media. We've swapped cliffs for clickbait, but the lesson remains. Some temptations don't just distract, they dissolve the very will to resist. The medieval siren wasn't just a monster. She was a mirror, reflecting the eternal struggle between what feels good and what is good, and the terrible cost of confusing the two. The centaur galloped into medieval Bestiaries as nature's ultimate paradox, a creature split literally down the middle, its human intellect locked in eternal struggle with its equine hunger. Though born from Greek myths, these half-man, half-horse hybrids took on new meaning in Christian Europe, where they became walking allegories for the soul's battle between reason and desire. On one hand, there was Chiron, the noble healer who tutored heroes like Achilles under the dappled light of sacred groves. On the other, there were the drunken hordes who shattered weddings into bloodshed, as in the infamous Lapith battle. Medieval scribes didn't just record these legends, they weaponized them, turning centaurs into moral lessons about the cost of letting appetite trample virtue. What fascinated artists wasn't just the centaur's hybrid form, but what it revealed about human nature. A single creature could cradle a scroll of philosophy in its human hands while its equine legs stamped restlessly, yearning to bolt. Illuminated manuscripts played with this tension, depicting centaurs drawing bows with scholarly precision even as their tails lashed like untamed whips. The symbolism was unmistakable. Civilization was never more than a stumble away from savagery. This duality resonated deeply in monasteries, where monks fasted and prayed to keep their own inner beasts at bay. The centaur became a mirror, reflecting every person's capacity for both enlightenment and excess. Yet the centaur's medieval reinvention came with a twist. Unlike their Greek predecessors, who were often tragic figures, Christian centaurs frequently represented heresy or lust. Their split bodies visually echoed the era's fear of divided loyalties, to God versus flesh, faith versus reason. Some Bestiaries even claimed centaurs couldn't wear clothes properly, their human torsos draped in robes while their horse halves remained naked, a comic yet cutting metaphor for hypocrisy. The message was clear: to live half in light and half in shadow was to belong fully to neither. But the centaur's legacy wasn't all fire and brimstone. Astrologers linked them to Sagittarius, the archer whose arrow aimed at divine truth. Alchemists saw their dual nature as the key to uniting opposites: Mercury's fluidity with sulfur's fire. Even in medicine, centaur imagery adorned apothecary jars, a nod to Chiron's legendary knowledge of herbs. This versatility ensured their survival long after Bestiaries faded. Today, they still charge through fantasy epics as mentors and monsters, proving that our fascination with duality hasn't waned. The centaur endures because it asks the oldest question: are we the rider or the horse, and how much control do we truly have when the wild within us smells home on the wind? From the phoenix's rebirth to the dragon's chaos, medieval Bestiaries wove a tapestry of wonder and warning, stitching together threads of faith, fear, and fascination into a vivid vision of the natural world. These weren't just collections of tall tales, they were mirrors held up to humanity, reflecting our deepest hopes and darkest anxieties. Every creature, whether noble like the unicorn or monstrous like the manticore, carried a lesson, a paradox, or a question about the boundaries of the possible. The griffin taught the power of duality, the mandrake whispered of nature's uncanny sentience, and the barnacle goose proved even biology could bend to the needs of belief. Together, they formed a medieval encyclopedia of the imagination, where science and scripture danced in the margins. What's remarkable isn't just how these legends shaped the past, but how they still pulse through our present. The phoenix rises in every superhero's resurrection, the dragon's shadow looms over fantasy epics, and the siren's song echoes in the addictive algorithms of our screens. These creatures endure because they're more than myths, they're metaphors, adaptable enough to fit every era's fears. The werewolf's struggle with duality speaks to our modern debates about identity, while the Ouroboros's endless loop feels eerily prescient in an age of climate crises and cyclical history. Even the humble Bonakin, with its absurd arsenal, finds new life in internet memes about turning weaknesses into strengths. The Bestiaries' true magic lies in this elasticity, their ability to morph without losing their core truths. So why do these ancient animal legends still captivate us? Perhaps because they remind us that storytelling isn't just entertainment, it's survival. Medieval peasants didn't have psychology to explain their impulses or biology to classify species, so they created narratives to make sense of a chaotic world. In doing so, they gifted us something timeless, a language of symbols that transcends centuries. Whether you're drawn to the unicorn's untouchable grace or the crocota's graveyard hunger, these creatures invite you to ask what they reveal about you. After all, every monster we imagine is a shadow cast by the light of our own minds. As we close this bestiary, remember that these legends aren't relics, they're living things still evolving in our collective consciousness. Which creature spoke to you the most? Was it the resilient salamander laughing in the face of fire, or the tragic antlion trapped between worlds? Drop your favorites in the comments and let's keep the conversation alive. For more deep dives into history's hidden corners, hit subscribe and join us next time as we unravel another thread from the past. Until then, keep an eye on the shadows. You never know what might be watching back.